The coffee had gone cold an hour ago, but the little girl didn't touch it anyway. She sat in the corner booth of the Stillwater Diner, both hands wrapped around a mug of hot chocolate that had also gone cold, watching the door like she expected someone to walk through it any second. She'd been watching that door since 7 o'clock. It was past 11 now. When Cormac Thane walked in out of the November rain, he almost didn't notice her. The diner was mostly empty. A trucker at the counter, a teenage couple sharing pie near the window. The kind of place you stop at because it's there, not because anyone planned it. He ordered black coffee and took the booth closest to the exit. Old habit. That's when the little girl's voice came across the nearly empty room, quiet but clear as a struck bell. My daddy forgot me. She wasn't talking to him. She wasn't talking to anyone, really. Just saying it out loud, maybe for the 100th time, like if she repeated it enough times it would start to make sense. Cormac Thane went still. Not because an abandoned child was unusual in the circles he moved through. Not because he was moved easily. He hadn't been moved easily in 20 years. But the way she said it, no tears, no panic, no performance, just a small voice delivering a fact the way a child might report a broken toy. That was the thing that stopped him cold. He turned around. She was maybe 7 years old, red hair in 2 braids that had mostly come undone. A backpack sitting beside her on the booth seat like a passenger. She wore a winter coat too thin for November, and one of her shoelaces was untied. "Who are you talking to, kid?" he asked. She looked up at him with brown eyes that held the particular exhaustion of someone who has been waiting a very long time for something that hadn't come. "Nobody," she said. "I was just saying." "Saying what?" She blinked at him, deciding something. "My daddy forgot me. He went to make a call outside and said he'd be 10 minutes. That was last night." The words hit Cormac like a fist to the sternum, not because of what they meant, because of how she delivered them. Flat, resigned, like she'd made her peace with it. He pulled his coffee off the counter, where the waitress had just set it down, and walked over to her booth. "Last night," he said. "Not a question. You've been here since last night?" "The waitress lady let me stay," the girl said. "She gave me hot chocolate and some crackers, but I think she's tired of me." Cormac looked toward the counter. A woman in her 50s with the eyes of someone who had seen too much and judged too little gave him a small nod. She'd been watching the girl all night. She just couldn't keep her indefinitely. He sat down across from the little girl. "What's your name?" "Winnie." "Winnie what?" "Winnie Hale. My daddy is Stuart Hale. He has brown hair and glasses and he drives a gray Honda. His phone keeps going to voicemail." She recited this like she'd been rehearsing it, like she'd planned to say exactly these words to exactly the right person and had been waiting for that person to show up. Cormac studied her face. In his line of work, you learned fast how to read a room, a situation, a person. What he read here was not a child whose father had gotten distracted. This was not ordinary negligence. A man who intended to come back didn't leave his 7-year-old daughter in a roadside diner for 18 hours in November. A man who left his daughter and didn't come back was either unable to return or had left her on purpose to keep her safe from somewhere he was going. Cormac had seen that calculus before. He recognized it in his own bones. Before we go any further, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from tonight. Because this is a story you're going to want to share with someone. Now, let's follow Cormac Thane into the darkest kind of night. "Did your dad seem scared?" he asked, before he left. Winnie thought about it. Her small fingers turned the cold mug in slow circles. He was on his phone a lot in the car, more than usual, and he kept checking the mirrors while he was driving. "When we pulled in here, he hugged me really hard." She paused. "Like the kind of hug you give when you're going somewhere." But he didn't say he was going anywhere. He said 10 minutes. Cormac sat back. His phone was already in his hand. He made 2 calls in the parking lot, standing in the cold rain with the diner's neon light turning everything pink and orange. The first was to a man named Lyle Pace, who ran the kind of operation that found things, people, information, money that other people needed found. The kind of man who kept strange hours because his clients always needed things at strange hours. Lyle, I need everything you can find on a man named Stuart Hale, drives a gray Honda, was last seen at the Stillwater Diner off Route 9 in Kenton County, yesterday around 5 in the evening. Is this a problem? Not mine, not yet, just find him. The second call was to his driver, telling him to pull the car around back. When Cormac returned to the booth, Winnie Hale was sitting exactly as he'd left her, still watching the door. Winnie, when your dad was on the phone in the car, did you hear any names? Anything that seemed important? She thought about it with the seriousness of a child who understood that some questions deserved real answers. He kept saying the name Hargrove. He sounded scared when he said it. She looked at Cormac steadily. He's never scared. My daddy is the kind of person who fixes things. Cormac's blood went very quiet in his veins. Hargrove. Philip Hargrove's name had appeared in his world twice in the past 6 months, and neither time had been good. Hargrove ran a network of shell corporations along the eastern seaboard that laundered money the way other people did laundry, quietly, efficiently, in enormous quantities. The kind of operation that required a very specific type of professional to keep the books clean and the paper trail invisible. A forensic accountant, for instance. Someone who knew where every dollar came from and where every dollar went. Someone who, if they decided conscience outweighed fear, would be sitting on evidence capable of dismantling an empire. Cormac looked at Winnie Hale's backpack, sitting beside her on the booth seat. What's in your bag, Winnie? School stuff, my library book. She unzipped it slightly and produced a worn gray stuffed elephant with a button eye that was threatening to fall off. And Gerald. Daddy said to keep Gerald with me wherever I went. He said Gerald was very important. Did he say why? Winnie looked at the elephant, then back at Cormac. He said Gerald was the most important thing I owned. He made me promise I'd never let anyone take Gerald away from me. She held the elephant a little tighter. But you can look at him if you want. You seem like someone my daddy would trust. Cormac took the elephant with careful hands. It was heavier than it should have been. He pressed gently along the seam at the elephant's back and felt the unmistakable edge of a small hard drive sewn into the stuffing. Everything clicked into place like tumblers in a lock. Stuart Hale hadn't forgotten his daughter. Stuart Hale had delivered the most valuable thing he possessed to the one place no one would think to look, tucked inside a stuffed animal in a little girl's backpack. He hadn't abandoned Winnie. He'd hidden her, and he'd given her the most critical piece of evidence in what was probably a federal investigation without her knowing she was carrying it. Cormac's phone buzzed, text from Lyle. 3 words, Hargrove has him. And then, before Cormac could process what that meant, his phone rang. Unknown number. He picked up. You're holding something that belongs to us. The voice was calm in the way that very dangerous men are calm. Measured. Unhurried. The voice of someone who had never once needed to raise it to be taken seriously. Leave it on the table and walk away from the girl. We have no issue with you, Thane. Cormac turned slowly, scanning the diner through the rain-streaked window. A black Suburban sat at the far end of the lot with its lights off. It hadn't been there 10 minutes ago. You've got the wrong read on this, Cormac said. The accountant made a serious mistake. He took things that didn't belong to him. We want them back. And then what happens to him? Silence on the line, the kind of silence that was its own answer. The girl's got nothing to do with this, Cormac said. Her father made her part of this when he used her as a dead drop. That's his error to own, not ours. Walk away, Thane. This isn't your territory. This isn't your problem. Cormac looked through the diner window at Winnie Hale, still watching the door with those steady brown eyes, still holding her stuffed elephant, still waiting for the one person she trusted most to come back for her. Here's how this goes, Cormac said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. You take that Suburban and drive it back to wherever Hargrove is keeping Stuart Hale. You tell him the accountant walks tonight. He walks, his daughter is safe, and what's on that drive stays between him and whatever federal office he's been working with. He paused. You touch that little girl, And I will make sure what's on that drive is public before morning. And I will make sure every organization Hargrove has ever worked with knows I'm the one who made that happen. He can spend the rest of his life explaining why he picked a fight with me over a forensic accountant. A pause stretched across the line. You're making an enemy tonight, Thane. Get in line. He hung up. He went back inside. Winnie looked up at him. Was that about my daddy? Yeah, Cormac said. It was. He sat down across from her. He'd never been particularly good at this part. The part where you told someone something true but terrible, and tried to make it land gently. He'd never had much practice at gentle. Winnie, your daddy isn't lost. He's being kept somewhere by some people who want something he has. But I'm going to get him back. She held Gerald a little tighter. Is he hurt? I don't know yet. Are you going to hurt the people who have him? Cormac met her eyes. There was no fear in them. Just the same steady assessment, the same careful waiting, like she'd already made a decision about him and was watching to see if he'd confirm it. If I have to, he said honestly. She nodded slowly. My daddy says that sometimes the only people who can fix a broken thing are the ones who know what it's like to break things. She looked at him. I think you know what that's like. Cormac Thane, who had spent 22 years building an empire on exactly that knowledge, had nothing to say to a 7-year-old girl who had read him more accurately than most adults managed. Stay here with the waitress, he said, standing. Don't let go of Gerald. I'll be back before sunrise. You promise? He paused at the edge of the booth. In his world, promises were currency. You didn't make them unless you could spend them. Yeah, he said, I promise. He walked out into the rain. The next 3 hours were the kind Cormac had lived enough times that the fear had been replaced long ago by a precise and terrible focus. Lyle's network traced Stuart Hale to a property in Calhoun Crossing, a former textile mill that one of Hargrove's holding companies had purchased 2 years earlier and converted into the kind of place where conversations happened that left marks. Cormac knew properties like that. He'd used similar ones himself, in different counties, in earlier years. He brought 4 men. Men who knew how to move in the dark and didn't ask questions until afterward. What he found at the mill was a man zip-tied to a metal chair in a room that smelled like mold and cold water. Stuart Hale was 38 years old and had the look of someone who had made a terrifying decision and wasn't sure whether it had been the right one. His glasses were cracked, dried blood along his jaw, but his eyes were clear. The 2 men Hargrove had left to watch him were no longer a problem. Cormac crouched in front of the chair. Stuart Hale. Stuart blinked at him. Who are you? Someone who found your daughter. The sound that came out of Stuart Hale's chest wasn't quite a word. It was the sound of a man who had been holding himself together through sheer force of will for 18 hours and had just received the one piece of information that unmade all of that will at once. Is she safe? Is she okay? She's in a diner on Route 9. She's been asking about you since yesterday, and she's been guarding that elephant of hers like her life depends on it. Stuart closed his eyes. Gerald, he exhaled. I didn't know where else to put it. I didn't have time. They were following us and I couldn't let them find the drive. Not after 11 months building that case. I couldn't let Hargrove just. 11 months, Cormac said. I noticed the discrepancy 14 months ago when they hired me for a quarterly audit. They didn't know what I was looking at. Most accountants wouldn't have, but I spent 3 years at the FBI Financial Crimes Unit before I went private. I knew exactly what I was seeing. Stuart looked at him steadily through cracked lenses. I'd been feeding information to a federal contact for 11 months. But last week Hargrove found out somehow. They moved faster than I anticipated. I didn't have time to get Winnie somewhere safe before they came. So you improvised. I hid her in the only place I could think of where they wouldn't think to look. A diner in a small town with a woman who agreed to keep an eye on her. Stuart's jaw tightened. I knew it would terrify her, but I couldn't take her with me, and I couldn't let them take her to get to me. She's 7 years old. She's everything I have. Cormac thought about a little girl sitting in a corner booth for 18 hours, watching a door, repeating to herself the one fact that made no sense and the only one she had. My daddy forgot me. She'd known, on some level, that it wasn't true. She was 7, not 5. She'd been waiting for someone to explain what it actually was. "Let's go," Cormac said, and cut the zip ties. They drove back toward the diner as the clock edged past 3 in the morning. The rain had thinned to a fine mist that turned the highway into a long, dark mirror. Stuart Hale sat in the back seat with his hands pressed flat on his thighs, like he was trying to hold himself in place. "You're Cormac Thane," he said, halfway there. "Not a question." "Yeah. I've heard your name. Most people in certain circles have." Stuart was quiet for a moment. "You're not exactly the type of person the FBI would want anywhere near one of their cases." "No," Cormac agreed. "Then why did you?" "She looked at the door," Cormac said. "Every 30 seconds, the whole time I was there, watching for someone who was supposed to come back." He kept his eyes on the road. "I've seen a lot of things in my life that didn't bother me. That bothered me." Stuart Hale had no answer for that. He was quiet the rest of the way. The Stillwater Diner came into view just before 4 o'clock, its neon still burning, warm orange light spilling across a wet parking lot where a single car remained. Through the window, Cormac could see the waitress at the counter and a small figure still sitting in the corner booth. He pulled into the lot. He barely had the engine off before he heard Stuart pull a sharp breath. Winnie had seen the car. She was off the booth seat before the door opened. Backpack over one shoulder, Gerald clutched to her chest, out through the diner's front door into the cold night air, braids entirely loose, coat half-zipped, running across wet asphalt without caring about any of it. "Daddy." Stuart Hale was out of the back seat before Cormac finished parking. He met his daughter 6 feet from the car door and went to his knees on wet asphalt without a second's hesitation. The cold, the water, the blood still dried on his jaw, none of it registering, just catching her, pulling her in, both arms all the way around her while she pressed her face into his shoulder and made a sound that was mostly his name and partly something that had no name at all. Cormac stayed in the car. Some moments weren't his to be part of. He watched through the windshield as Stuart pulled back just enough to look at his daughter's face, checking her the way parents check, methodically, carefully, with the particular relief that only comes from counting something precious that you thought you'd lost. Winnie held up Gerald. Stuart laughed, a wet, wrecked, exhausted sound, and pulled her back in again. Cormac looked out at the highway. He wasn't certain what he was feeling. It wasn't a feeling he'd had much practice naming. Something that sat between satisfaction and the particular ache of things you've never had but briefly understood. Eventually, Stuart knocked on the window. Cormac lowered it. "I don't know how to thank you," Stuart said. "You don't have to. You drove out at 3 in the morning for a child you'd never met." "I said I'd be back before sunrise." Cormac looked at him. "I meant it." Stuart held his gaze for a long moment. This man who commanded operations in 3 states, who had a name that made certain rooms go quiet, who had sat across from a 7-year-old in a diner booth and listened to her like she was the most important person in the room, because she was. "Winnie told me she trusted you," Stuart said quietly. "She said you reminded her of the kind of person who keeps promises. She's a perceptive kid. She gets it from her mother." The brief shadow that crossed Stuart's face said everything about where her mother was now. He steadied himself. "Mr. Thane, what's in Gerald? Hargrove may have partial copies of some of the documentation, but what's on that drive is the piece that ties everything together. My federal contact, Agent Dana Brecky out of the Louisville field office, she's been waiting on it. If you give it to me tonight." "Give it to your agent," Cormac said. "What's on it is between Hargrove and the federal government. I've got nothing to hide that isn't already known by the people who matter." He paused. "Get somewhere safe tonight. The 2 men at the mill won't be a problem, but Hargrove has more than 2. "I have somewhere we can go." Stuart straightened. He held out his hand. Cormac looked at it for a moment. Then he shook it. He pulled out of the Stillwater Diner parking lot as the first gray light began separating sky from tree line. In the rearview mirror, he could see Stuart and Winnie Hale standing together in the orange neon glow, Winnie still holding Gerald, watching the car go. At the last moment before the road curved and took them out of sight, she raised one small hand and waved. Cormac raised 2 fingers off the steering wheel. Then the road curved, and they were gone. 14 months later, Philip Hargrove was convicted on 43 counts of money laundering, wire fraud, and criminal conspiracy. The trial lasted 11 weeks. The testimony of federal informant Stuart Hale, backed by 11 months of documented evidence, including a complete financial record retrieved from a waterproof drive that had spent 18 hours hidden inside a stuffed elephant, was described by the prosecuting attorney as the most comprehensive financial case had presented in 20 years. Cormac Thane followed the trial from a distance, the way he followed most things, through intermediaries, through news that found him without being sought. He was in Chicago when the text arrived. Unknown number, but he knew exactly who had sent it. He got life. Winnie wanted you to know. She says Gerald says thank you. Cormac stared at the message for a long time. Then he did something he hadn't done in longer than he could clearly remember. He smiled, not the kind of smile that preceded negotiations or closed deals or made rooms go quiet. The other kind, the kind that doesn't mean anything except that something in the world turned out the way it should have. He put the phone in his pocket and walked back out into the Chicago afternoon. Somewhere in Kentucky, a little girl who was now 8 years old was probably looking at a door and waiting for someone. And, this time, Cormac had no doubt at all that person was going to come through it. Because some promises, once made at the right moment to the right person, are the ones you keep without thinking. Not out of obligation, not out of code, but because somewhere between a cold diner and a gray dawn, a child with 2 undone braids looked at you like you were exactly the kind of person she'd been waiting for, and decided, without evidence, without reason, just on the particular faith that small children carry before the world teaches them not to, that you would come back. And you did. If this story reminded you that the most unexpected people sometimes show up exactly when they're needed most, give it a like and share it with someone who needs to hear it tonight. And tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? We read every single one.